Good morning, everyone. My name is Gisele Youmbi, and I'm the Professional Development Program Coordinator at the World Bank Family Network. We're really delighted to have you here today at the Ideas into Action workshop sponsored by the World Bank Family Network. Thank you very much for coming. This is the second of 3 events in the Ideas into Action series organized jointly by the World Bank Family Network, the Inter-American Development Bank, and International Monetary Fund Family Associations. This series is a set of workshops aimed at helping participants consider becoming an entrepreneur and providing them information and support to take the first steps down this path. Our session today will focus on structuring and launching your business. Our keynote speakers are Mr. Daniel Stevens, Attorney at Law of Law Office of Daniel and Stephen LLC, and Ms. Alisha Jacobsen, Attorney at Law of Law Office of Alisha L. Jacobsen. And they will discuss the legal aspects of starting a business in the U.S., especially for G4 permit holders. Mr. Steven and Ms. Jacobsen's presentation will be followed. This will be a lively discussion and moderated by Ms. Yvonne Quahe. So their presentation will be followed by a panel discussion with members of the 3 family associations who have successfully launched their businesses. Our panelists today are Mr. Babak Akhlaghi, intellectual property lawyer, managing partner at Novotech IP International, Ms. Adriana Colback, financial advisor, and Mr. Ross Perkins, entrepreneur and managing partner at Mason-Dixie Biscuit Company. As I said earlier, this will be a lively discussion, and the discussion will be moderated by Ms. Yvonne Quahe, who is HR specialist at the World Bank Group. You'll find you have all received a copy of the speakers' bios, today's agenda, and a question card. And we please ask you to write your questions on the card and hand them to our volunteers during the panel discussion. You can also find outside business cards and brochures from Mr. Stevens, Ms. Jacobsen, and Mr. Ross Perkins, Mason-Dixie Company. And we also have brochures from the World Bank Family Network Professional Development Program. Now I would like to invite our keynote speakers, Mr. Steven and Ms. Jacobsen, for the first part of today's programs. Thank you.
Thank you, Gisele. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay, I'm, as she mentioned, Alisha Jacobsen. I'm a spouse. My husband is Jeremy Sawadago. He is in HR. Well, actually, I think he's, talent acquisition now, but anyway, whatever his new position is. And we have been in Maryland, and he's been working with the World Bank for 12 years. Prior to that, so he's not originally from the United States. Prior to that, we lived in many different countries and many different states, not with the World Bank, but just our own personal lives and work situations. So I know what it was like to leave, every time and pull up stakes and roots and start all over again. And what I did, because we had children, I was able to use teaching as my mobile career. But after so many years of that, he was going like this and my career was like that. And when we came to Maryland, I wanted to start over. So when our son started college, I started law school. So I've only been practicing for about 5 years. I don't have the same experience as Mr. Steven, but I am learning and I'm enjoying what I'm doing. So just curious here, how many of you have, if you're here, you're interested in starting a business. Has anyone started their own business here? Okay, yes, good. And are there any independent contractors in the room? Okay, I can raise my hand too. I'm also an independent contractor. Anyone working in retail sales? Okay.
Not legal yet.
Not legally yet. Okay, I won't say anything. Okay. Everything is confidential here, right? Okay. Is anyone interested in purchasing or operating a franchise? Okay. Anyone into real estate as a real estate agent? Okay, good. So we have a nice variety of interests, and I'm sure there are other interests that I haven't called out, but it's always good for us to know what people are interested in doing out there. So let's see if I can, the first one. We really didn't need to put this, because I'm sure everyone's aware of this, but just to make sure in case there isn't, unless you're a U.S. citizen or you're a green card holder, you must have some kind of authorization to work in a business or to start even to start your own business. People have come to us and said, well, if I'm just starting, do I have to have the authorization? And it's kind of a gray area. If you're not earning any income, that's one thing. But if you're earning income, that's, anytime you're earning money, there's a tax consequence to that. So you have to be aware of that. In order to have the work authorization, you'd have to have some kind of permit, which I hear that there's an office, the visa office here, that will help you apply for that. So that's one thing I didn't have to do, okay? I didn't have to apply for any kind of work authorization, but it takes anywhere from 6 to 12 weeks, I'm told, before you can get the authorization. And the reason for that authorization is you also have to have a tax identification number. And so that's just the basics to get going with that. The first thing that many people say before starting a business is, do you have a business plan? I can tell you that not everybody has a business plan. My business plan was a laptop and a space off the side of our kitchen, okay? Because I had some student loans to pay back. I was fresh out of law school, and at that time in 2010 when I graduated, there was a glut of lawyers and the legal profession was not hiring. Market analysis. I did my market analysis by going to various legal clinics and seeing what was the need out there. And I saw that there was a lot of need for family law, which is where I ended up starting. Organization and management. What kind of structure and organization do you want your business to have? Looking at marketing and sales. That's something that is important to consider. And then your financial projections. Any kind of good business plan will take all of that into consideration. But if you don't have a business plan, don't let it stop you, I don't think, okay? You can do that later. The next important thing is raising capital. Whoops, I don't want to do that. So some businesses do require capital, and capital is any kind of large amount of money that you need to invest in your business. We would never advise you to do this kind of task, undertake this task without seeking professional, preferably an attorney's advice, somebody who knows and is experienced with federal and state securities laws, because there are consequences to that. You don't want to just start committing mistakes like that as well. If you have a business that you don't need capital, you want to invest your own money, or you have somebody who's loaning you that, or you can get a loan, that's fine. But anytime you start asking for capital, you have to be really careful, and we advise you to seek an attorney. Dan can speak more about that as well later. The other thing you want to think about is your form of business. If you just start off on your own and you don't need a license and you don't have to be registered, that's fine. You can do that depending on where you are. You always want to check with your localities. I'm a sole proprietor. I'm one person. I started off, I don't have to be registered. I practice in Maryland, but I did have to have a license. I had to have a license to practice law. So it depends on what kind of business you're interested in doing. You should always consult your local office. A lot of times it's at the courthouse to find out, do you need a license to do what you're intending to do, okay? As a sole proprietorship, there's a consequence of personal liability. People often say to me, why are you a sole proprietor? I said, well, I have malpractice insurance. So that should cover me, okay? But as you'll see, Dan has formed an LLC, so he will talk more about that later. And as far as filing, another person asked me once recently, well, if you're a sole proprietor, how do you pay your business taxes? And it's simple. On our 1040, it was a Schedule C. So I claim all my expenses and my deductions and my profits and losses, okay? So that's the default. I didn't have to do anything. I started working and I was the sole proprietor. That's the very basic one. But the biggest risk for that is the personal liability, unless you have some kind of insurance. And in my case, I have malpractice insurance. If two people are working together, I think Yvonne asked me, are you and Dan partners? I said, no, we're not partners. We do work together, but we haven't formed a partnership. But if there were two people working together for profit, okay, that's considered a partnership. And there are tax consequences to that as well. Each partner then becomes jointly and severably liable, meaning that if we were partners and we didn't have any other structure set up, if I committed something that caused problems, financial consequences, he could also be liable for that. So in general, partnerships are not a good idea unless you structure them differently. The accounting is complex, so you always want to see an accountant if you decide to do the partnerships, but you have other options. So basically, one person doing his or her own thing is the sole proprietor. Two or more people working together for profit becomes a partnership.
Okay, as Alisha mentioned, my name is Dan Stephen, and I'm going to discuss some of these other issues with regard to how an entity is formed and what kind of an entity you should have. And when we say entity, what are we talking about? We're talking about the structure of the business, which typically is different than a sole proprietorship. And a lot of this is legal jargon that most people sort of passes over their head. They don't understand it, they don't need to know, and so they forget about it. But it is very important, because if you don't know it, that's when you can get into trouble with your business. Now, the key things to remember that what we're really worried about when we... All right, can this work? All right. I think everybody could hear me anyway, but we'll use this. Think of two things that you should worry about and why you should have an entity. Number one is taxes. Number two is lawsuits. Those are why we bother with having an entity. Taxes in this country, as I'm sure you know, vary according to the type of entity or business that you have and the way in which you earn your income. That's why we often discuss the tax consequences of corporations and LLCs. The other thing that we worry about is liability, which are lawsuits. If you have a business, you obviously don't want to have your personal assets be subject to the claims of creditors. Someone who is suing your business and could get a judgment in a lawsuit against you. It'd be nice if you could protect your home, your auto, your personal bank accounts from that liability. That's why people form an entity, because an entity will give you, in most cases, protection against lawsuits. Now, one of the primary entities that I'm sure everyone in this room has heard about is the corporation. And this causes a great deal of confusion. You will not be tested on this later, but you should remember that state law, not United States or federal law, regulates the formation of a corporation or an LLC, as we'll talk about later. If you wish to form a corporation, you do it through the state in which you live or the District of Columbia. You don't go to the United States government. They have no control over the formation of a corporation. What a corporation does, any form of corporation, is first of all to give you the limited liability, that you are not personally liable for the debts or claims against the corporation or other shareholders. That's what I talked about before. It gives you immunity from lawsuits. And again, there's always exceptions, but let's use that as the general rule. Now, you can lose your contribution to a corporation. So, if anybody in here has shares in Google or Apple, you know that if something should happen to Google or Apple and the shares become worthless, you're going to lose your investment. But if somebody sues Google or Apple, you're not going to have to worry about it because your personal assets are going to be immune from that lawsuit. That's what a corporation is all about. And if you form a corporation for your business, you are going to have that protection. Now, the other thing that confuses people, and again, I don't know how many of you have heard this, but you may have read about or discussed the issue of whether a corporation is an S or a C corporation. And this is something that, believe me, confuses Americans as well as foreigners. It's simply a tax classification. People will say, oh, I have an S corp. Oh, I have a C corp. All that means is that you have a corporation and you have chosen that the federal government should tax you in a particular way. And that's what an S or a C corporation designation is. Now, the C corporation is what you have by default. If anybody here goes, if you go to the state of Maryland and file what we call articles of incorporation to form your corporation, by default, the federal government and the state of Maryland is going to consider you a C corporation, a separate entity from the owners, and all the income is going to be taxed at what we call the entity level. The corporation will file an annual tax return. The corporation will pay taxes on any profit it has. It will be able to deduct things like salaries and other expenses. But again, it is the corporation that has to pay the taxes. Now, the good news is that C corporations allow your profits to be kept in the business so that you don't have to spend it all out in salary and in other expenses, and you can grow your business. But there's no benefit to the shareholder, to you, if there are any losses. The corporation will have the losses. The corporation will pay less taxes, but it's not going to help you any. All right, now, contrast that with the S corporation. The S corporation is what we call a pass-through entity. It's just like being a sole proprietor in many ways. If you're a sole proprietor, if you're not a corporation, all the money you earn, as Alisha pointed out, goes through to your personal 1040, your personal tax return. You file what is called a Schedule C, and you're going to be taxed on it. But if you have losses in your business, you're going to be able to deduct it to a degree against your other income. So an S corporation is in many ways treated like a sole proprietorship or a general partnership for the purpose of taxes. Each shareholder pays taxes on what their share of the profit is, based on their percentage. Now, there is a limit of ownership. So, for instance, shareholders must be either U.S. citizens or permanent residents. So for some people, that may be a barrier. All that means is that if you form a corporation and you are not a permanent resident or a U.S. citizen, you're going to be a C corporation. And S corporations lose some of the benefits, the fringe tax benefits that are available to C corporations. Now, this is, if you wish, you can close your eyes and not look at this. But if you really want to know, this is some of the benefits of and problems with an S corporation. It's called the 2% rule. A 2% shareholder, which means you own at least 2% of the shares in the corporation, is treated as a partner, not as an employee. That means that the following benefits are not available to a shareholder of a S corp that would be available to a shareholder of a C corp. In other words, a S corporation shareholder who has more than 2% can't get group term life insurance paid for by the corporation. Certain accident and health plans are not going to be paid for by the corporation. Medical reimbursement plans, disability coverage, cafeteria plan benefits, which has, of course, nothing to do with food. It has to do with being able to choose from multiple benefits, and meals and lodging. Now, this is really not a big issue for most startups. If your accountant says that you should be an S corp, typically there will be good reasons to do it. But I point this out just so you know that there are some issues with being an S corp as opposed to a C corp. All right, now, the last of the different ways you can do this and be an entity is the preferred way, in my view and in the view of most attorneys who represent startups. And that is the LLC, the Limited Liability Company. Once again, It is not the federal government that determines whether you're an LLC. It's you by filing it with your state or with the District of Columbia. You do it by filing a form. It's called Articles of Organization instead of Articles of Incorporation, which is what you use for a corporation. The LLCs, instead of having shareholders, have members. So if anybody here wants to form an LLC and you're the only member, the only person who owns it, you're going to be a single member LLC. You're not going to be a shareholder, you're going to be a member. Here's the good news. An LLC offers this very same liability protection as a corporation. That means if you have an LLC and the LLC does something that causes a creditor to sue them and get a judgment, your personal assets are protected. That's the primary reason that people form LLCs. The other good reason to form an LLC as opposed to a corporation is that they're much more flexible. You can choose to be a single member or a multi-member. You can choose to be taxed as a corporation. Let me say that again, because this is where their eyes begin to spin. Wait a minute, didn't you say an LLC is different than a corporation? Absolutely. Can it be taxed just as a corporation? Absolutely. Why? Well, that's our system. I can't explain it, but it works out for us, all right? So, let's say you form an LLC, which means that you don't have to, in most states, publish the names of your directors or even who owns it. All you have to do is have what is called a registered agent or a resident agent, as opposed to a corporation where you have to report the names of your directors and, in some states, the owners. But it may be important to you that you wish to be taxed the same way as a corporation, because there are certain fringe benefits that are available to corporations that are not available to either single member or multi-member LLCs. So a multi-member LLC, if you do not elect corporation status, is going to be treated as a partnership, a general partnership. And that means that all the income and losses will flow through as a pass-through entity, as we talked about before. And if you don't get this right away, you're not alone, all right? But what we're trying to do here is basically raise your consciousness a bit about some of these concepts and some of these terms, because hopefully all of you, if you're going to form an entity, are going to get professional advice either from an accountant or an attorney. So you don't have to remember all these things, but I want you to understand that these issues exist and there are pros and cons, and if you just go into a business blindly without knowing these, you may be giving up significant benefits. Okay, this is a little chart which of course, everybody here should take home and memorize, and tomorrow we'll send you an email and you have to answer the questions. Let's look at, on the left, each issue. Limited liability. That means, can you protect your personal assets if the business gets into trouble? C corporation, yes, it has limited liability, check mark. S corporation, yes, absolutely. LLC, yes, absolutely. Okay? Great. They're all entities, they all have limited liability. Okay. Can the business be owned by non-U.S. citizens or non-resident aliens? Answer, C Corp, yes, absolutely. S Corp, no. LLC, absolutely. So that's good. We lose a check mark there under an S Corp, though. Okay. Income of the entity is taxed at the entity level. Remember what I said before. Who actually has to pay the taxes? Who can declare the losses? Is it you as the member or the owner, or is it the business itself, the entity? For a C corporation, the C corporation pays the taxes. It files a separate tax return from you each year, and that's an additional cost because typically an accountant must prepare a corporation tax return. They're rather complex. Okay, the S corporation, no, that flows right through to you, so you pay that on your own tax return. LLC, It depends. It depends on whether you're a single member, multi-member, and whether you have elected corporation status. Because remember, an LLC can say, yes, we're an LLC, but we want to be taxed as if we're a C corporation or an S corporation. Tax on entities' income is paid by owners individually. Again, that's the S corp and the LLC. I say maybe under the LLC because it depends on whether you choose to be taxed as a C corp or an S corp. Owners can deduct 100% of their health insurance premiums. Absolutely, if you're a C corp. Absolutely, if you're an S corp, and maybe, again, depending on how you handle your LLC. Same with deducting business losses. It's an S corp and maybe an LLC. And best fringe benefits, C corp and an LLC if it decides to be taxed as a C corp. Okay?
Can I ask why you don't have sole proprietor on there or partnerships?
Because they're not entities. A sole proprietor is just a person, not an entity. An entity is either an LLC or a corporation. Okay? So the very top of this says forms of business entities. A general partnership, which is what Alisha talked about before, the definition of a general partnership is two or more persons engaged in a business for profit. They're not an entity. Each of them is liable for all the debts and problems that occur in the business. Okay, next.
Yeah, we just basically want to point out this.
Okay. If you don't remember everything here and you want more information, each state website has a great deal of information on this. So you can write these down, or if you've got it in your handout. These are the websites for Maryland, D.C., and Virginia. But you have to be aware that because of the pluralistic nature of government in the United States, within the state, very often counties and even cities have their own rules with regards to things like business licenses. And you have to be very sure that if you require a business license, that you check not only the state level, but also the county and sometimes even the city level. Next slide is filing and setup of entities. In addition to going to the state websites and seeing the information there, you can find multiple ways in which to set up a business. You can, of course, consult a lawyer, which I am actually in favor of. You can also go to internet companies such as LegalZoom, which does a great deal of advertising. LegalZoom will set you up, and it'll be for a very reasonable price. But LegalZoom and Nolo.com and some of the other sites cannot give legal advice. They will not do anything other than give you the same basic information that you can get on the state websites. And I can't tell you how often we've had clients come into the office who've been set up by one of these sites, who come in and we discovered that they did not get exactly what they wanted. Sometimes they got nothing even near what they wanted, and they've gotten into trouble because of it, because they simply haven't had professional advice. If, however, you have done your homework and your research and you know exactly what you want, then certainly there are reasonable alternatives. Now, when you set it up, you're going to have to pay a filing fee to the state. That varies from state to state. In Maryland, it's $100, $150 if you want expedited, which you're going to want because you're not going to want to wait 6 months. DC, it's $150, and Virginia, it's $100. And then each state has an annual fee just to remain in existence. You have to file an annual report, do a personal property return sometimes, and typically it'll be between, well, in Maryland, the annual fee is $300. In DC, $150 every 2 years, and in Virginia, an annual fee of $100 every year.
Is there any filing fee for sole proprietors?
There is no filing fee for sole proprietors because you are not an entity. Remember.
And what
General partnership is not an entity. It's any two people together in a business for profit. That's a general partnership. Now, a partnership can have a partnership agreement, and most do and should. But you don't file that partnership agreement with the state because you're not an entity. I have to say it again. You're going to be taxed. You're going to have to get your business licenses, regardless of whether you're an entity or not, but you don't have to file anything with the state. Okay. All entities should have what we call internal documents. Operating agreements, partnership agreements, bylaws, minutes, and resolutions. It depends entirely on the type of organization that you have. You're going to have to contact multiple, or well, let's call them agencies, because sometimes they're agencies of the state, sometimes of the county, sometimes locally. The IRS, you're going to have either an EIN, which is an employer identification number. You're going to have to get a state number if you have employees, in order also to file your various returns, workers' compensation returns. There are a multiplicity of returns that you may have to file, especially if you have employees. You may need a trade name registration. Okay, what is that? Let's say you form an LLC, call it Acme LLC. But you don't, and you're selling a product. You don't want the product to be called Acme. You want it to be called whatever the great name of the product is that you've devised. Well, your LLC is one name, and your product is another. But you're doing business under the name of the product. So you need to file a trade name certificate for that reason. Let me give you an example. Kentucky Fried Chicken. That's a brand name. All right? And if you go down the street and you'll obviously see a store, KFC, Kentucky Fried Chicken. Who owns Kentucky Fried Chicken? It's not a company called Kentucky Fried Chicken. It's a company called Yum, Y-U-M Incorporated. That's who owns Kentucky Fried Chicken. So, Yum Incorporated has filed a trade name certificate in every state where it does business, which is, as far as I know, 50, saying Yum Incorporated does business under the name of Kentucky Fried Chicken, even though Kentucky Fried Chicken it's not an entity, has no status. It's just a trade name. Why is that necessary? So that if someone wants to sue Kentucky Fried Chicken, they know who is the real party to be sued. It's not Kentucky Fried Chicken, it's Yum Incorporated. Okay? So keep that in mind. You might want to have a different name for your business than for your product.
What about foreign versus domestic?
Okay, and foreign versus domestic entities. You would think that would mean a domestic entity is a United States entity, and a foreign entity is anything other than the United States. That's not how it's done in this country. A foreign entity is any entity that was formed in a state different than the state where you are. Okay? So, let's say you file an LLC in the state of Maryland, and you do business in Virginia. You're going to have to file as a foreign entity in the state of Virginia and file an additional annual fee. Okay? Doesn't sound fair, but that's the way it is. Insurance. It is critical. Do not overlook having insurance. Even though you have limited liability if you form an LLC or a corporation, you still don't want to have your business go under just because there's a lawsuit. So what you do is you get insurance. It depends on the type of business you have, what kind of insurance you're going to get, but it's obviously worth having. One of the things that we often advise is for people who do real estate investment, is that we advise that each house or property that is owned in the business should be put into a separate LLC if possible. Well, the problem with that is that gets expensive. So most real estate investors use the 3-property rule. They put no more than 3 properties in one LLC or one corporation. So that means if there's a problem with those properties and there's a big lawsuit against them because someone has injuries occurring as a result of negligence on their property, the most that they're going to lose is the properties in that particular LLC. All right? But even if you have that sort of situation, you still should have insurance, property insurance, because you don't want to lose the properties, right? You'd rather have insurance to pay the judgment. Intellectual property, we're going to speed through this because we're running low on time, and there's going to be a later speaker on this. But you should be aware that intellectual property is property. And there are three types of, generally, of intellectual property: copyright, trademark, and patents. If you are starting a business, let's say you're a computer programmer and you decide to be an independent contractor, well, what the source code that you're developing or the products that you're developing, that's intellectual property, and you want to protect that. And so when you're forming a business, you need to be aware of these issues so that you can register the copyright, that you can register the trademark, or you can get a patent. And these are all things that people often overlook and they get into trouble later. Okay? Employees. Independent contractor versus an employee. If you are starting out a business and you are a sole proprietor, or even if you're in a partnership, you have to understand that if you work for another company or if you hire someone, you have to decide whether you or that person is an independent contractor or an employee. And that's important because of the tax consequences. As you know, if you're an employee in the United States, there are deductions, half of which are paid by you and half by your employer. If you're an independent contractor, you have to pay all of those FICA and Medicare taxes yourself. Obviously, this has different impact on G4s, but in general, if you're not working at the World Bank and you're otherwise qualified, you have a work permit in the United States, you're going to have to pay the employment taxes. So you're going to have to know the rules if you have employees, or if someone hires you and says, well, we're treating you as an independent contractor. That means you're going to have to pay all of the employment taxes yourself, rather than having your employer, the person who's hired you, pay half those taxes. We're going to probably answer more of these in the question and answer period, because I think that this is a little too complex for this at this point. Yeah. So the basic legal documents you're going to need, regardless of whether you are an entity or not, just to do business, you're going to need purchase agreements and services agreement for your customers or your clients. Independent contracting agreements, once again, for your customers or clients. Buy-sell agreements, that's between you and any partners that you have. What happens if you or your partner becomes disabled or dies or wants to leave the business? What is the buyout going to be? Is there a buyout? These are things that if you don't put in writing can cause huge problems down the road. Non-compete agreements, what these are, it says if you have a partner in your business and that partner leaves, you don't want them to take the intellectual property or any other assets that the business has and start up a business that competes with you. IP-related agreements, that's intellectual property. That's what I mentioned before. You want to have agreements about who owns the intellectual property. And employee manuals. If you do have employees, you're going to need to have those so that your employees know what to expect and you don't get into trouble with them. Okay, I think, Alisha, you want to talk about this?
Last part? Okay. Thanks. Just the last part, we just want to say that when you're thinking about your business, make sure that you, as you're planning, that you leave room for legal fees if you need to consult with an attorney, accountant's fees, and insurance premiums. So those are the three things. You might not need an attorney for everything, but you certainly want to have one that you could consult. An accountant, I think, is very important because especially with all the tax returns or all the business deductions, et cetera, that you definitely need a good accountant. And then insurance, as Dan mentioned. So, of course, we have a little joke. If you don't put in that money in the beginning, you might not be paying for it now, but you might be paying for it later. So, just be careful about that. That's it. Do you have any questions?
Yes.
I will be very loud. Thank you very much. That was very useful. Actually, I have a question about the slide that you have skipped about the salaries that you actually pay either to yourself or to other employees. My question is that if you have an LLC entity, can you actually pay yourself a salary, or can you hire your relatives as salaried employees? And is it the W-2 that you need to give them at the end, or is it better to hire yourself to actually just take the money out of the company and hire your relatives as 1099s?
Okay, that's a great question. It depends. You certainly can hire your relatives as employees of your business. If you do that, regardless of whether you're an LLC or a corporation or a sole proprietorship or a general partnership, if you are paying them salaries and they qualify as employees, you must give them a W-2 and you must deduct their FICA and Medicare, and it doesn't make any difference what your entity is, okay? Now, whether it's a good idea to do that, if you want to make them partners or give them an interest in the business, and again, depending upon the type of tax situation you're in, you could give them what we call dividends, which there would be less taxes on, okay? But there are so many different ways that this could happen depending upon whether you're taxed as a corporation or an LLC or a general partnership, that it's difficult to have a blanket answer.
But that was, I have a very specific answer. Is it, you told us that LLC can actually choose how LLC gets taxed, whether as C or as corporation or any other entity. So what is the choice that I need to make in order to legally pay myself salary and the salary to my 16-year-old daughter? Be that $5,000 a year or $10,000.
Okay.
So what is the choice that I need to make to allow for LLC to give
If
me
you-
the opportunity to pay salaries to my relatives?
Let's, first of all, what do you mean by salary? You mean simply taking money out, or do you actually want to be paid as an employee with deductions?
Yeah, I have a very specific scenario. I have a LLC supposedly, and I made $100,000, right? $100,000 puts me in a 30-something bracket. I owed 30,000 on my 100,000, right? So what I want to do is that I want to distribute the income between my family members, 16-year-old daughter, who I'm going to give the $10,000 that she's going to be taxed as 10%. So I want to minimize the tax obligation on my family by distributing the income in smaller chunks between the relatives. And that's totally legal from the point of view of IRS. What my question was is that what is the choice that I need to make LLC to be taxed as S corporation or C corporation or anything else?
Okay, well, first of all, you're saying you're giving the money to your daughter and to your relatives, right?
She picks up my mail, she writes my papers, like she does little job for $5,000 a year.
Okay, well, as far as the IRS is concerned, if they're not working for that, then it's a gift, which is a whole different issue, okay? If you want them to get the money and they do some basic things, the money that you pay has to be somewhat equivalent to the services they're giving. If you can't pay somebody $50,000 just to pick up your mail. The IRS is not going to allow that, all right? But what you can do if you decide to make yourself an S corporation and give a small percentage in the S corporation, and again, it can be an LLC that is taxed as an S corporation, to your family, then at the end of the year, there's going to be a profit in your business. And you divide up the profit according to the percentage of each person in the business. That way you can route money to those people without having to worry about employment taxes and without having to worry about whether they're actually an employee. Okay? Now, if you want to pay them a salary and withhold, they're going to have to do something, some minimal amount for that. And you can do that by simply, you don't have to be any entity. You can simply be a sole proprietorship and pay them a salary.
What's the difference between salary and an independent contractor? Is it better?
Again, the independent contractor, the issue is whether your daughter or the relatives would qualify as independent contractors. That means that you don't control what they do, that they make their own decisions and pick their own time to do it, that they have some expertise that you're hiring them to do. The IRS doesn't like people to be classified as independent contractors because the IRS is losing out on the income taxes. So you have to meet some very strict requirements in order to say that a person is an independent contractor. Okay?
Yeah, Mr. Stevens, have three questions. I'm going to be brief. The first one is if you can elaborate a little bit about the personal property return. The second is what is about the Delaware LLC? Why they are so sexy? You see them everywhere, especially when you are working with international transactions. And then in the list of documents that you mentioned, you didn't include the confidentiality agreements, which I think they are essential for any business that is looking for funding, for example. So.
Okay, the first question was the personal property tax return. Right, the personal property tax return, most states have this. It's simply a annual return in which you report on the value of the items that you're using in your business. Typically your computers. If you have a retail business, then you're going to have inventory. These are things that are taxed because they're business assets. The taxes are usually not that high, but it is an annual return, okay?
An LLC that owns an apartment for renting, so you don't have
No,
any,
you would, no.
I don't need to file
No,
that?
the apartment is not personal property.
Exactly.
Right. Exactly. Now, what were the two, quickly, the other two?
And the other one was about the Delaware LLCs or corporation. What is so appealing?
There is nothing, it's, what's appealing about it is that people make money by saying it's great to do it in Delaware, okay? Really, I'm serious about that. Delaware has some very favorable corporate tax law that really makes no difference for a startup or for a small business. If you were to form an LLC or corporation in Delaware, guess what you have to do? Because you're in Maryland, D.C., or Virginia. You're going to have to file as a foreign entity. So you're going to be paying both a Delaware registered agent, an annual report in Delaware, a registered agent in Maryland, and an annual report in Maryland. So people don't tell you that when they want you to do it. Okay?
And the last one, confidentiality.
Confidentiality, there are multiple other agreements, yes. Confidentiality agreement, or an NDA we call it, non-disclosure agreement, is something that we often use when you're negotiating with another business.
Hi, good morning. My question was kind of similar here. If you own, let's say that you invest in real estate properties and you own properties in different states, let's say one in Maryland, one in DC, and one in Florida. My question to you was, where do you recommend me to open the LLC, you know, given that the properties are located in different states, if we consider tax benefits, considering which is going to be most beneficial for me when at the moment that I need to fill all these forms and to pay taxes.
Right. Well, as I mentioned before, you're going to have to fill out the forms regardless, because if, let's say you have a DC LLC and it owns property in 3 different states, okay, then you're still going to, because depending upon that state law, the other states, and what the definition of doing business is, you still may have to file as a foreign entity in those states and file an annual report. So it's a judgment call. In some cases, some people will open an LLC in each state in which they have property. Others will simply keep their single LLC and then file as a foreign LLC in those states, if it's required. It's not always required. It depends on the state. There's someone down here? Yes.
I have a business right now in Guatemala. That's where I'm located right now. I am in the point of getting back here. Hi. So I have a business in Guatemala, and I'm in the point of getting back here. This is why I'm here. So I would be considered as a franchise. Is that it? No?
No, franchise is a totally different thing. Okay?
Okay.
You have a business in Guatemala.
Yeah.
And you want to run that business here.
I have a business in Guatemala. I want to keep running my business in Guatemala. I have somebody there that will do that, and I want to open the same business here by under the same name and everything. So I want to do like a 2 business
Right.
country.
But are you going to own the business here?
Yes.
then it's not a franchise.
No,
No,
okay.
okay, it's got a totally different
Oh,
thing.
because you need a separate
No,
person
it-
to own it or something like that?
Right, a franchise is where you license someone to
Oh,
run
okay.
a business that you have. They pay you a fee to
I got
run your
it.
license.
Okay, I understand.
To run your business.
So what I need to do, is there any way that I can run the same name and everything, or do I need to open a different business here? What are
No,
the
you-
steps that I need to take for this?
You can open it in the same name here, or you can register it as a foreign entity here, a true foreign entity. But there'd be no reason to do that. You can, for instance, Toyota, obviously is a Japanese company, right? Toyota has Toyota America. That's the company that runs things here. So you have your Guatemala business, and you have your Guatemala America business, okay? And that's all you'd have to do. And you'd still have to register, and you run everything through that business, and it can be owned, your American company can be owned by the Guatemala company, or vice versa. Okay? It's very flexible.
Thank you very much. I have a question. If my father wants to invest to start my business, I'm over here. So can he do it while I have G4 and he's just on B1, B2, and as well as he can be a partner to my business, or he just go through to the process of E2 or business visa kind of thing?
Where is your father located?
Pakistan.
Okay, well, if you form an American business,
Yep.
and
No, it will be new from here. It's
Oh,
my idea, my business, but money will be coming from my father.
right, but the
Yeah.
but the business is going to be located here. Is that
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Okay. Well, he can certainly do that, but there are certain rules about foreign investment, okay, that are going. That's rather too complex for this subject, but there are limits and reporting obligations for an American business that has a certain percentage of ownership from a foreign investor. And you're
All
going to
right.
have to comply with those if necessary. If it's a small casual business, look, it's not
Oh,
going
that's
to, not going to be an issue.
Oh, okay.
But there are foreign investment rules.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Hi, I have a question. I would like to know the relation between
Oh, there you are.
the migration status and also forming a new company. I think most of us will have a G4 with a working permit. So which are the main implications for, deciding LLC in terms of taxes, for instance? I couldn't find any information clear of a G4 with a working permit. You have to file every month. What is for instance, how much do you have to pay? You have to pay 30%, 13%? It was very confusing and not very clear, not being American and not having a green card. It's completely, you don't have deductions also? Do you have deduction the same as an American or green card holder? I couldn't find that. So you have to give me like 3 points or 3 main, where to.
All right, I'm going to defer
To encourage
Alisha.
to.
My understanding is that if you're a G4 and you form a business here and you're a permanent resident, okay, then you're treated exactly as an American would be, and you have the same taxes to pay on the business as if you were an American, okay?
But if you are not,
Okay. Right, right. Well, if you're not a permanent resident,
the same,
no.
resident and then there's non-resident.
Right, right. I'm sorry. I only am familiar with the rule for a resident. And if you're not deemed a resident and, well, if you're here, if you live here for, 2 out of the last 5 years, 100, if you live here 180 days in 2 out of the last 5 years, you're a resident. Okay.
No.
Well, then you're not, yeah. Then,
Anyway, as far as taxes go, if you have to pay taxes, there's no special difference between if you are, if you have to pay income taxes and federal, it doesn't matter what your if you're G4 or not.
Right.
Okay,
Yes.
there's no degradation or anything like that, no scale.
Right. Any income earned in the United States is subject to United States tax. Whether you're a G4, whether you're a Martian, it makes no difference. Okay? So,
It's going first.
yeah,
Same thing.
it's the same thing.
No.
Yes.
Sorry, I just would like to say that for G4 dependents, we actually do have seminars for your accounting questions, which we do conduct over the year. And also, I think we may have them also on our YouTube channel. So you may want to go back and look at them as well.
I just wanted to say that we're going to take one more question, and then we're going to have a little break, and then the panel discussions, and we can come back and have your questions afterwards, because otherwise we're really running behind time, if that's okay. So,
Yeah, mine is really easy. It's building on this question on business personal property tax declaration. In Maryland, the $300. That's the annual fee you were referring to, keeping your LLC alive in Maryland.
Correct.
So there is no other annual fees that you
There's
are
no
aware of.
annual fee. There is the personal property tax. It's,
Exactly.
It's
That's
actually
the same
reported on the same form.
Yes,
Right.
and as my experience there, so even though you don't have anything, you only have your property, you still do that. It's a blank page. It costs you $300. It's a way to collect money.
Yeah. One. Right.
Sure.
For an LLC, though.
Yeah, for LLC. Yeah.
Right, for an LLC. If you're just a sole proprietor or a partnership, you don't have to pay that fee, okay? Or a corporation. It's $300 for a corporation or an LLC, okay?
So, thank